Hello, can you hear me? Perfect. So give me 2 more minutes. I'm actually running late. I just concluded one session at like 4th floor, running down. So just give me a minute, and we will be getting started very soon. Let me go back. The API SDK one. This is working, Frankie? Perfect. Can you hear me? Is audio good?
Yeah, good.
Should we start? Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jatin, Purohit. I do have co-speaker who is running late, but that's fine. I have got you covered. So I work with technical marketing team. It's been 4 years. I'm part of VMware. I did vSphere technical marketing team, and during that particular phase, I was dealing with the core vSphere stack, and then I was also looking into Power CLI. Then some reorg happened, and I moved back to hyperscaler team, which is basically taking care of Oracle Cloud VMware solution, Google Cloud VMware engine. So I'm looking after that as well. So in my current role, I look after hyperscaler solution as well as some of the work that we are doing on the API, SDK, and CLI. So a quick check, how many of you are using Power CLI for VMware automation? That's great. So this working, okay. Disclaimer, some of the content that I will be presenting contains future statement on the future releases. So this is just a disclaimer for you. Let's get this is not working. Anyways, let me stand here. Okay. So what we will be talking about is we have two main personas. The first one is obviously the administrator, which I guess most of you are, who is using the VMware tooling for automating VMware infrastructure. And when I say VMware tooling, it's mostly around Power CLI, Terraform, Ansible, and tools like these. The second persona, however, is a little bit different, which wants to build the web services, which are our partners like Veeam, Veritas, Oracle, who are building the co-developed integrated solutions with VMware. And I call that particular persona as developers. These developers are using API and SDKs, the VMware API and SDKs, and they are building integrated solutions with VMware. So this particular session is mostly focused on the second persona, which is the developer. And we do understand and accept that the developer experience, however, is not that great compared to the administrative experience that you get with Power CLI. So in this particular session, we will be discussing about the current state of our APIs, SDKs, and what are the challenges we have and how are we solving about all these challenges. We will also talk about the Open API v3, which we are enforcing on all the VCF solutions and technology stack. And then we will also be discussing about some of the authentication and packaging mechanism that we have on API and SDKs. So let's look at the current state of VCF APIs. In VCF, we have vSphere, vSAN, NSX, and vRealize. So, okay. If you look at the solutions, right? vSphere has SOAP API, vSphere has REST API, vSAN has SOAP API, and then rest of the product have the REST API. What you are seeing over here is we have different API specification and different protocol for different solutions. So for example, we have SOAP API coverage for vSphere and vSAN, and then for other solutions, we have REST API coverage. Even on the API specifications, some of the APIs like SOAP, they use WSDL, which is a web service definition language. And then for the REST API, they use OpenAPI v3. And we will talk about OpenAPI in the later part of this conversation. But one thing which you will see, right, on the vSphere side, the OpenAPI version is v3. But the challenge over here is you have different API specification, different API protocols that you are currently working with, and it's not really great when you build a fully comprehensive integrated solutions on VCF. So some of the challenges that we have is inconsistent API schema, the OpenAPI v3, v2 differences that we have, no unified authentication. This is very surprising. If you authenticate with, let's say, vSphere Web Service API, in past, you could not do and could not reuse the same authentication for vSAN, for NSX, or other solutions in that particular stack. Ideally, the way it should happen is if I'm authenticating with, let's say, SDDC Manager or vCenter server, I should have that authentication for other solutions as well. And obviously, if you go to our documentation on the developer.broadcom.com, we do have inconsistent API reference documentation as well. So what you have is you have different flavors of API, different flavors of protocol. They follow different specification, and we have a very cluttered developer experience. So what are we doing to solve this particular problem? So on the API state, we have great API coverage on SOAP, but more and more customers are asking for a REST-like API experience for our SOAP API. So we are working towards to provide a SOAP API translating into a REST-like experience, and that we are doing with the VI.JSON APIs. On the authentication, we want to have a unified authentication, which means that if you authenticate once for any of our API, you should be able to take that authentication key and authenticate with the other APIs as well. And then while we introduce the new API via protocol, which is VI.JSON, and we will talk about it in the later section, we want to make sure that whatever automation solutions that you have built at this point of time should be backward compatible, and they are running without any changes to the new changes that we introduce. However, on the SDK part, as of today, we have more than 9 or 10 SDKs that you get with VCF, and the challenge over there is, let's say if I give you an example, PyVMomi, which is a Python SDK for vSphere Web Service API, you install PyVMomi using pip install PyVMomi, and you get the PyVMomi SDK installed automatically for you. But this is not the experience that you get when you interact with the vSAN SDK. You have to download vSAN SDK offline and then do the manual configuration to set up your vSAN SDK. So to address this, what we are doing is we are releasing a new unified SDK, which we are calling it as VCF SDK. It's a single SDK coming with 2 language binding, which is Java and Python. And it will be a single SDK that you install, and you will have compatibility with all the vSphere, vSAN, NSX, and all the VCF solutions that you have. And obviously, the authentication. Today, if you work with the vSAN or vSphere or NSX SDKs, you have to authenticate them separately. That's kind of a little bit overhead when you deal with authentication and authorization with different SDKs. Some of our customers, they don't want to do the online installation. They don't want their environment to get exposed to the internet. So for them, we are offering all their SDKs, APIs, and documentation in a secure Broadcom repository, so that in that particular way, they can download and use all our SDKs in the offline method as well. And then for online, we are ensuring that all our SDKs, all our APIs are available on PyPI for Python, Maven for Java, and then GitHub, so that you can choose whichever way you want to work with. You can pick and choose the online installation method and download those SDKs. The Power CLI coverage. I think in the initial part of this conversation, I took a quick poll, and almost all of you are using Power CLI. All the complexities that I have talked about in API and SDK are not there in Power CLI, because Power CLI actually abstract our APIs and SDK, and then they give you a very uniform, simple commandlet structure that you can work with. And that's why Power CLI is so popular in the community. I'm happy to tell you that Power CLI has crossed more than 10 million downloads, right, over the years, and it has continued to be the de facto CLI tool from our side. So on our side, we will continue to offer Power CLI coverage for you, so that you can have very easy access to our platform and solutions. We are also ramping up our work towards the Terraform provider. How many of you are using Terraform? A quick check. Great. So couple of years back when we started Terraform, we didn't had that great reception from the community. But now, as we move towards more a cloud-centric world, we are seeing the adoption of Terraform getting more and more popular. With the recent Terraform release, within few months, we had got 2 million downloads for the VCF and vSphere Terraform provider. So that's quite huge. We give great importance to both Power CLI and Terraform, and we will continue to build on top of it. But one challenge still remains, as I've said, right? The Power CLI Terraform will address some of your administrative use cases. But how about if you want to build a SaaS service or web service on your end, which will integrate with the VMware solution? Power CLI will not be able to do that, because that is not what Power CLI is intended to do. It's a CLI tool. It's meant for administrator to automate their daily operations and reporting, but it is not a tool to build the web services. And that's where the importance of API and SDK comes into the picture. So what are our recent accomplishments? We have recently introduced a VI JSON. This is a REST-like equivalent for all our SOAP APIs, right? So today, let's say if you want to get rid of SOAP APIs, we have got it covered with VI JSON. It works with JSON RPC protocol, and you have a same REST-like experience for on the SOAP API. So it's kind of translating our SOAP API into a JSON RPC, which gives you a REST-like experience. So technically, on our side, we can say that we have a complete REST API offered for all the VMware solution. And this is because we are introducing VI JSON. I will talk about VI JSON and will give you a demo as well. The unified API authentication, we have, with the recent release of 8 update 3, we have introduced the unified authentication with the vSphere Web Service API, vSphere Automation API, and also vSAN API. For other products like NSX, we realize the work is currently in progress, and we will bridge that particular gap as well. And obviously, recently we released Power CLI 13.3 or 2. So we are continuing to work on Power CLI and Terraform releases as well. But the goal here is to basically deliver a simple, consistent, and extensible automation experience. I will talk about what does extensibility means, and when we will discuss about OpenAPI v3, we will come to know about that as well. Okay, so I was talking about unified VCF SDK, and I think this is the session title that you all have been seeing in the catalog. The current state of our API is this. You have VMware Cloud Foundation. You have different solutions, and each solution has different sets of API. So for example, vSphere Web Service. This is age-old VMware API, which you all have been working. So if you are not able to relate to what this API is, if you go to the vCenter server URL /mob, which is the manage object browser, that's your vSphere Web Service API. That's the SOAP API that we are talking about. More and more customers are moving towards REST experience. So they are asking us to give a REST-like experience for SOAP API, and they don't want to deal with working with the SOAP. So we are introducing a VI JSON for vSphere Web Services as well. On the automation API, if you go into the developer portal, what you have is API Explorer, and this is basically the automation API written in the REST protocol. And the rest of the APIs that you see are basically written in the REST. Each of these solutions have their own separate SDK, and in some cases, some of the product doesn't even have the SDK at all. So now what you have is, first you have to discover what are the SDK you need to work on the VMware Cloud Foundation, which is really painful, really cumbersome experience to get started your developer journey on the VMware Cloud Foundation. So the challenge is separate SDKs for different VCF solutions. Some of the solutions doesn't even have the SDK. And then another issue is the language binding. Some of you might be working with Python. Some of you might be working with Java. Some might be working with TypeScript. Some might be working with some other programming languages. On our part, building the SDK for each and every language is literally challenging. And and we don't have enough resources to allocate for each and every programming language and then deliver the SDK binding. So how are we solving these challenges? The same stack, we will offer a single SDK, which is unified VCF SDK, with 2 language binding by default, which is Java and Python. Now the question comes is, how about if I am using a TypeScript or JavaScript? Where is the SDK? The answer lies is, today, if you go to a developer portal, there are few solutions which offer OpenAPI v3 standard document, and then there are few solutions which doesn't even offer OpenAPI v3 document as well. So we are enforcing that each and every VCF solution should publish the OpenAPI v3 document publicly, and customer can download that particular OpenAPI v3 document and create their own SDKs on their own. Don't worry, I have a demo. I will show you how to take the OpenAPI v3 document and create your own SDK in your own language binding. So it's a consolidated VCF single SDK for VCF, VVF, and VMware solutions. It does support backward compatibility. So how about if you have existing solutions you have already built with vSphere and vSAN or other products, they will continue to run. Because what we are doing is, we are not rewriting the SDKs, we are simply making you available and making you sure that all the SDKs are packaged into a single one, and they work in cohesion when you install them in your environment. And obviously, we will deliver Python and Java language binding by default for all the SDKs. If you look at the vSphere automation, right, the bottom half that you see, right, the vSphere Web Service API, these are the traditional virtual infrastructure management APIs, which offer a great coverage on SOAP. And then obviously we are introducing VI.JSON, which will provide you the REST-like experience. And then we also have the REST API. For each of these APIs, we have the SDKs, management SDK, and then automation SDK. So all the API and SDKs that you see, this is what our developers are using. And the tooling that you see abstract all the complexities that I am talking about on the API and SDK, and gives you a very simple tooling experience with tools like PowerCLI, Terraform, and DCLI. So this is just a context. When I use the word like vSphere Web Service or vSphere Automation API, this picture will give you an idea what exactly I'm talking about. So what is VI.JSON? The bottom half that you see, right, the Virtual Infrastructure Management ESX Agent Manager. If you actually go to vCenter server/MOB, these are the API servers that you have. These are the SOAP API collections, which are grouped into these API endpoints. Currently, only the vSAN API, the vSAN SOAP APIs are not ported into VI.JSON, and in the upcoming release, we will be porting VI.JSON also into the SOAP API. But the high-level principle is, if you understand the REST API, right, you have an API client, you have different methods to invoke API like get, put, post, and patch, and then you have the API server which will give you a response. In case of SOAP API, which is old, which is like 20, 25 years old, it works with the XML data structure. Working with XML is a little bit tricky, it's complex, but over here what we have is, we have request and response sent through the JSON data object, and which is more flexible, more easy, lightweight to use. And on top of it, we are providing the Open API specification. This is the first time, I guess, how many of you have seen the Open API documentation? Any? Okay. So today, if you go to AWS, Azure, or any cloud provider, and if you look at their APIs, they do have this particular documentation available publicly. And what it is used for, I will explain you in the later part. But the interesting thing is, this is human readable. I can read it, I can understand it, what this API documentation is talking about. But at the same time, this document can be understood by tools like Open API Generator, Kyoto, or any tool that understand the Open API specification. Let me get back and explain you what is Open API. In the era of SOAP API, we had WSDL, which is Web Service Definition Language. It's a standard which defines how the SOAP APIs will be created and will be architected. It has the basic building block, it has a basic structure that everyone has to follow. In the case of REST, you have the Open API specification, which explain you the different design the different standards to create the REST APIs. So what you have is you have the info, which gives you the API information. You have the servers, which talks about the server endpoint. You have the different paths, which are actually the API path. And then you have tags and the component. The component are basically the resources. I throw this particular document to the Open API generator, and I create my own SDK binding. I create my own documentation, and I can do the API validation on the go, all by using this particular documentation. From our side, what we are doing is we are providing you the Java and Python SDK binding, and we are making sure that we provide you the Open API documentation as well, so that you can take that particular documentation, send it to the Open API generator, and generate your own SDK bindings on your own. So we will take a demo on this particular front. So what is the impact? We have a partner company, which is ServiceNow. How many of you have worked with ServiceNow? Raise your hand. If you see, the main construct in ServiceNow is basically JavaScript, right? They love JavaScript. They work with JSON, and for them, the real challenge was they were not able to create the integrated, comprehensive solutions with VMware, because most of our technology stack were offering the SOAP APIs. So with the VI JSON, we introduced a REST-like API experience. So with that, they are able to create the integrated solutions on vSphere as well. Because they love JSON, they love REST API, and they basically create the integrated solutions on VMware. On the single authentication, so you have web service API, you have automation API, you have vSAN. So this is a quick example. I'm generating a session through vSphere automation API, which is my REST endpoint. I get the session ID, and I can reuse this particular session ID with the vSphere web service API. So this one, the one that you see on the top one is basically a REST API. The second one that you see is basically the SOAP API. So the ID that you see over here is basically coming from a REST endpoint, and I'm reusing the same authentication in the SOAP endpoint. This looks very simple or complex depending on which context you look at it, but consider if you are a developer and if you're building a VMware solutions on top of it, you have to manage different authentication for different APIs. This is very difficult, very complex, and it's not the best practice when it comes to the security. So ideally, what we want to do is we want to have a single authentication across the entire stack, so that you can reuse the same authentication on all the APIs, and you get a very unified, comprehensive experience. I just have, I think this was the last slide, and let me quickly move into the demo part, okay? So this is my very famous Power CLI interface. I'm not able to switch the screen. It's still showing me the presentation. Okay, there you go. Okay, this is the famous Power CLI console that you see, right? So we'll get started with our demo. The first thing which I will do is I will explain you the SOAP API, which are the old APIs. So let me go back and access the VMware vCenter server. The Manage Object Browser, right? How many of you are familiar with this particular console, right? This is a very old API explorer that we have. So I'm into the Manage Object Browser, and these are the manage objects that I have. I have Account Manager, I have Authorization, I have Certificate Manager. So basically, any data that you are getting with core virtual infrastructure system like vCenter Server ESXi, most likely if it is coming from prior to 7.0 feature, it is most likely coming from the SOAP API. So this is how the SOAP API Explorer looks like. However, how many of you have used the SOAP API binding in Power CLI? Raise your hand. No. Now you will say yes. So if I go here, and if I see get VM, and if I use the command which is get view, how many of you are aware of get view command? So this is your answer. You all have been using the SOAP API Explorer in Power CLI for over these years using this get view command. So the data that you now see is actually coming out of SOAP API. So you were not exposed to all these complexity for all these years, because Power CLI has made that easy for you to give the data and extract the data from our API endpoint. But you will understand the complexity when I actually hit the API from Postman, and then you will understand the complexity in dealing with the XML data. So let's go into the Postman. This is my Postman collection. And what I have is, these are the vSphere Web Service API. So let's talk about the login. Does it look nice? Right? That's the XML data. How many of you are working with XML data? Raise your hand. Good. Now I can tell you, all of you are working with CSV. Anyone working with CSV files? Right? How many of you are working with JSON? Pretty much everyone, right? And that's the difference. When you talk about SOAP APIs are written in WSDL. These are old APIs, and they are tied to the XML object, the data object. Any SOAP API that you see, it has a SOAP envelope. This is the SOAP envelope that you see. And then all the action or all the tasks that you do with SOAP API are actually encoded into the body, in the envelope body. Now, interesting thing to see over here is, if you see the URL, right? This particular URL remains same. It doesn't matter which API you are invoking. It doesn't change, because the magic lies in this SOAP body. So let's say if I'm logging in, this is how my body is. Let's say if I'm powering on the virtual machine or doing any other task, I will make the changes in the request rather than doing the changes on the URL. So the challenge is, if I want to have an observability on my APIs and understand what are these APIs are doing, it's really difficult to track that on the SOAP API. Okay, so let's quickly hit the API and list them. So I will click send, and the response that I got was again an XML document. It's not easy. It's a complex document to work with. It's outdated in many ways. Well, if you are an old developer, you might be comfortable working with, but the new challenge is new people are joining into your organization, and they want to contribute towards the development, but they just don't understand the SOAP. What they understand is the rest. Okay, so let us take a look at it. In one of the example, I have this VM, which is test VM. Currently, this VM is powered off. Okay. Let me go back and power it on this particular virtual machine using SOAP API. So this is the SOAP API. If I again go back and look at the data, if you see the URL doesn't change, it remains the same, but the body has changed, right? So it's very typical old Postman kind of a system where I send an envelope to the receiver, and nobody knows what is inside in this particular envelope unless and until you open it, right? So in the case of SOAP API, you have to send and receive requests in the XML data structure, and that's not very useful to work with. And if you are into the observability and if you try to monitor the APIs, the URL doesn't tell you the complete story, right? So let's run this particular API and see what happens, right? So it has created a task, and again the output is an XML data. Now, powering off and powering on the virtual machine is not a big deal. It's a very easy task, but when you build a long workflows on your automation side, dealing with the XML data can be a tricky one, right? So let me go back and see what my current status looks like. So now the virtual machine is powered on, and this is how you invoke the SOAP API, okay? So that's the SOAP experience. Let me go back and do the same thing with the VI JSON. So this is the VI JSON API, what we are seeing over here. And the difference that you see now is in the URL, right? Does it look like a REST URL to you, right? You have HTTP methods, you have the resources on which you are working on, and then it also talk about the actions that you are taking on, right? So we have basically completely got rid of our SOAP API and then rewritten these APIs, or I would say translated these APIs into a VI JSON, which gives you a REST-like experience. So let me go ahead and execute these APIs, and we'll understand their results as well. So let me grab the authentication key. And again, what I'm doing over here is I'm grabbing the authentication key from vSphere Web Service API, which is the SOAP API, and I'm for the REST API. So again, unified authentication that I have been talking about. Go to the environment, go to the authorization, and just change the authentication. So currently the virtual machine is powered on, right? Let us power off the virtual machine. So this is the API, and if you see, this is the resource, this is the MOID, and then this is the task that you are actually invoking. In the body, if you have more and more parameter, let's say if you are configuring a virtual machine, the body will be a JSON object that you can easily work with. It is very easy to understand, and the response is also obviously a JSON object. So now, how does this output looks like compared to the XML one? Does it look simple, right? Easy to understand? So that's the difference, and that is what VI JSON API is. So today, if you are working with SOAP APIs, the good news is, except for vSAN, all our SOAP APIs have equivalent REST-like experience with the VI JSON APIs. And it's a great experience for our customers, because more and more developers who are coming into the new ecosystem, they understand the REST experience. They don't understand the XML or the old APIs. So on that particular front, you have a very easy interface to interact with our legacy APIs. So that's the VI JSON for you. The other thing I was talking about is the open API, right? So let me go back and showcase how you can build your own SDKs. Any questions so far? Okay, so what you see over here, right? We have Sandeep over here. So yeah, we are into the demo, but we can conclude the session later on. So what we have over here, okay, what we have over here is all the YAML files, right? This is the open API documentation that I was talking about. Let me quickly show you how this documentation looks like. This is a YAML documentation which gives you all the details, all the information about the API. Now, what do we do with this particular documentation? We can create our own language binding. So what I will be doing is I have a tool which is a Kyoto. Kyoto is the open API tool from Microsoft, which is recently released. And the important thing which you can see is I'm generating an SDK from an open API documentation, right? And over here, you see a language which is Python, because I know Python, so it's easy for me to work on this particular language. But let's say if you are working with Perl, if you are working with TypeScript, if you are working with C#, you just have to change the language binding over here, give the open API specification, give the name, where exactly this SDK you want, and just hit generate. So let's see, we are generating a full-fledged SDK live using open API documentation. So all the warnings that you see can be ignored, because these are the warnings. These are basically the warnings because Kyoto is currently not able to understand some of the data formats that we have in OpenAPI v3. We have already given the feedback to Microsoft, and they are currently working on it. But when I execute this particular command, it says the generation is completed, and now what you see is you have a new API client which is automatically created. And let me dive into what this API client is all about. So I get into this. What I have is all the models, which is automatically generated. And if I see, these are the models. These are the SDK bindings that you have generated using OpenAPI v3. So now, I was talking about the SDKs. I was telling that we are committing the Java and Python SDKs for the VCF as a VCF solution. But let's say if you have other language binding, you can download the OpenAPI documentation, use Kyoto or OpenAPI generator or any other tool in that particular fact, and generate your own SDK bindings. And that's how all the public cloud providers are doing. So that's about it. That's the demo. Let me know if you have any question. And we have Sandeep, who is literally running here and there. So over to you, sir.
Sorry. I can take any other questions you have around what we are doing for the overall automation story as well. So please feel free to shoot that. So
can you make it? Can you make VMs from it? Can you push, like, if you have a template from a JSON Can you use those APIs to push out machines?
Okay, so if I understand your question, can I use JSON to create VMs? Yes, you can, because we have all those APIs, and the core virtual infrastructure APIs are now converted to VI JSON. So
Yeah,
we have
the provisioning APIs were earlier using the SOAP-based APIs they were. So even that got converted to JSON. So now I think you can leverage that for sure.
When you get to do the pulling of the authentication for it, would that have to be changed every single template you would make, or would that stay stable throughout every game?
So it depends, right? So if you're connecting to the same VC, as of now, so then you can leverage the authentication session. There is expiry for that, and you can use it for the time being. So there's no issue. So, but if it goes across multiple VCs, then I think there's a difference.
That brings me to the next one. Is there an SSO in it?
Yeah.
Or is it just a user?
So there are two aspects to that again. Okay, let's talk about that. So one aspect of that SSO is, okay, you can set up a simple ways to set up a ELM, a linked mode between those VCs, and you'll get your SSO. You can use the same token and then do it further across the VCs. So that is one mechanism. And other mechanism is in 8.0 we introduced a single sign-on for vCenter and ops layer. So you can set up a single sign-on over there and then use the same token. That is another approach. So either of those things should work.
Any other question? Yeah.
Is this going to be integrated into the Go VMware?
Okay. Yeah. So I know this question was coming at us. See, I have said, right, we have limited resource on our hand. We cannot build SDKs for each and every language binding. So we are sticking to Python and Java. And why we are sticking? Because when we look at our CEIP data, right, if you install PowerCLI, or if you actually log in into any VMware ecosystem, you get this CEIP consent form, right? Whether you want to send the data to VMware for further analysis. When we looked at that particular data, the most frequently used language was Java, and the second was Python. And I'm talking about the programming language to build the web services, the PowerCLI part of it. Because if we include PowerCLI, then obviously PowerCLI will be the first one. But on the programming language side, right, the Java and Python are mostly used. So we are prioritizing that particular aspect. But I have shown you the example of how you can easily create the client bindings. What we are enforcing on each and every solution level is whatever APIs that you have, you should be publishing Open API v3 documentation. It should be available publicly to all our customers. You can take that particular documentation, use Kyoto, use Open API Generator, or any other tool that you are comfortable with, and then generate your own SDK binding. You have anything to?
No, I think, so let me understand. So you're heavily into PyVMware, you're using PyVMware extensively?
Go VMware.
Go VMware?
Yeah, we have like 7 to 10 web servers that do various things. And so using operations teams, storage.
Okay. So,
The two Go clients, the SOAP client, the user client,
Yeah.
no, it's not like we don't want to invest on Go. So it's more about the prioritization part, right? I think as Jatin mentioned, we are starting with Python and Java in the first iteration, but Go is definitely there in our plan. It's not like we don't want to get there. So we're trying to understand how many of our customers are very much interested or looking at Go. So definitely, I think.
How much of that Java data was coming from things like VRO or applications that being on this language and I can look closer to the like, as an example, like all of our VRO workflows are in Java and JavaScript.
Okay.
How much of that interaction with the vCenter that you're collecting data on is coming from sources like VRO that are giving that language?
So when you say the data coming from vCenter, pretty much any other component we have, for the inventory data, the source of truth will be vCenter. So if you've seen the keynote notes today, another key project what we announced is with VPC, where even the networking inventory will be part of vCenter.
I guess my question is, you guys say Python and Java are the top most languages. How much of that data is coming from VRO contributing Java?
Oh, okay, yeah, a lot. See, because VRO is one of the top community-driven things. So most of the plugins for VRO is coming from our community as well. So yeah, a lot of it is coming from VRO too. So
Is that skewing your data on how much Java is being used because it's a native language for VRO?
yeah, so not actually. So VRO has got maybe around 45,000 users or so, but VC is around close to 300,000 users. So yeah, so it's not actually. Yeah. But do you have any language recommendation in mind or something? Got it. Okay, so understood. So Go is something which you prefer. Got it. Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, it's very important for us to explain like the kind of question this gentleman has, Jeremy, right? Thank you so much for asking these questions. Let's say if you are the administrator, right? And if you are building the automation solution, we would still recommend you to look at Power CLI, Terraform, and Ansible, because these are the tools built for administrators. On the developer side, let's say if you are an organization who are building your own web services, probably for internal consumption or for the public cloud web services, or let's say a data protection product like Veritas or backup, that's when the work that we are doing on the API SDK comes into the picture. So we really have to understand, which person I belong to. Am I an administrator or am I a developer who is building the web services? So if my answer is administrator, keep focusing and keep building your automation on Power CLI, Terraform, and Ansible. But if I'm building on the web services, it is worth taking a look at the unified SDK and then the VIJSON APIs that we are introducing. Yeah.
Okay.
So
that is good.
That's good. Yeah. Which is great, right? And this is the reason, right? You have looked at the kind of complexities that we had on API and SDK, right? But you don't experience the same thing on Power CLI. And that is what made Power CLI the tool that it is today, with more than 10 million downloads, and it is still growing fast. And let's say if we have to do a Power CLI session, these chairs won't be empty one. But these API SDK are very niche when we talk with the community. So I think that's where the difference is.
Yeah.
Any other feedback, questions?
Can you expand what you're allowed to do within the VCF?
So
Like, what permissions is required to set what permissions on?
So okay, for that.
A whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
Like work or Power CLI or
So the global permissions, why it is hard is you don't have a public API for it. We are releasing the public API pretty soon for it. So,
Yes.
so that should solve the problem, what you're saying that. And once that happens, it's a cakewalk with this one. So it is a REST-based API. You should not see a problem at all with that. So Jatin will pretty soon post some kind of blog post explaining how that can be done.
Yeah.
So you'll see more details around that one. You please keep following the VMware blogs. You'll see some details around it.
Is that all? Yeah.
Java and Python about how
Sorry, can you please repeat your question?
you said the two popular programming languages were
Java and Python.
and Python. Why not PowerShell as well?
Yeah. So that's what I said, right? The Java and Python language binding, the data that we are talking about from the developer persona, we are not including the administrators and their choices into this particular equation. Because when we consider the administrators and how they consume our automation capabilities, it's pretty much Power CLI all the way.
Yes.
But Power CLI uses all these APIs behind the scene, and it is our engineering team who is working to solve all these complexities and giving you a very high-level abstraction view to interact with the VMware interface.
So if your question is, okay, do we have Power CLI commandlets for covering all these APIs and functionality? The answer is yes. So the capabilities what we launched in Power CLI, how we are working is, the earlier approach used to be, we used to generate a separate commandlet for each and every public API out there. So now we have come up with a better mechanism for every public API, primarily the REST-based APIs, what we have confirmed PHP, you will automatically, a Power CLI commandlet will be generated for that. So Power CLI is definitely covered. In case you see some performance challenges or some of the issues which is not covered with the Power CLI, you're seeing some slowness with any of the commandlets which get generated, then do reach out to us. Pretty much every public facing API coming from us should have a corresponding Power CLI available for that one. So
Yeah.
that's taken care of.
Any other question? I think that's it. That's it from my side.
Awesome.
So thank you so much, and we are here through all the Explore. Feel free to reach out to us, and we would be happy to take your question and take the conversation forward. So thank you so much for joining the session. Thank you.
Really appreciate your time.